Good morning, everybody. We're going back to England today. I was supposed to be going on a trip to sparkling wine country in England this week, so I figured I'd go there virtually. Check out my schedule on my website because I have a few upcoming chats. I'm hosting a webinar for Southwest France on Thursday, talking to David Keck in Vermont on Friday. Monday the 20th, we're going to be in Cava, and then on the 10th, we're going to be back in England, and on the 24th, no, sorry, the 22nd, and then the 24th, we're going to be talking to Kura Saki in Brooklyn. So, a little bit busy coming up. So, check it out. So, we're going to go to Hattingley Valley in Hampshire, England, very shortly. Emma Rice. Hey, Luca. Luca, I've been dying to question you about events in Bordeaux, but we'll have to chat privately. So just waiting for Emma to join. The Instagram gods are very fickle and it often takes a little while to connect. But we got an eye off. Oh, there she is. All right. There, it may take a minute to connect. So, I'm going to talk to the wind for a few moments while we wait. But welcome everybody. I have a good selection of chats going all over for the next few weeks. So check out my website. Also, Sweet Wine Halloween is coming up. I'm starting to plan that. So if you want to get involved, join my newsletter and such. Hi, Emma.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Looks like you have a nice enough day out there. Cloudy but clear, or cloudy but
Yeah,
hopefully decent.
pretty cloudy and not that warm, I'm afraid.
Oh,
But
okay, that's not great. Well, thank you for doing this, and I'm glad you got good reception out there. I see your vines are high, so I want to talk about that. But first, can you introduce yourself? And I like to say, tell us how you got where you are, because some people knew from a very early age they wanted to be in wine. Some people were born into a wine family and left and came back. It's all very interesting to me. So how did you get where you are? And tell us who you are.
so my name is Emma Rice, and I'm the head winemaker at Hattingley Valley Wines in Hampshire. And I think we are one of the biggest exporters of English wine to the States, in fact,
Awesome.
particularly the East Coast.
Mhm.
So hopefully you can find our wines in New York along the eastern seaboard there. Um, I come from a family that had no interest in wine whatsoever. We didn't drink wine, not for any reason other than that my parents were, and my family generally just never got into it, I suppose. But I was lucky enough to, as a teenager, aged 15, believe it or not, started working in the local pub, just collecting glasses, delivering sandwiches, and washing up and stuff. Um, when I was 15. And as it so happened, that pub had a restaurant attached to it called the White Horse Inn. And it was the only restaurant outside of the US to hold a Wine Spectator Grand Award for its list at the time.
Wow,
At the time,
cool.
this is this is back in the early 90s. And so I worked there part-time while I was at school for quite a few years, got really interested in why all these people were spending thousands of pounds on bottles, hundreds of pounds, if not thousands of pounds. The wine list, there were about 3 or 4 thousand wines on the list at any one time, 60 odd thousand bottles in the cellars. So I was fascinated as a teenager. And then when I was about 19, I was still working there part-time. They had their 25th anniversary dinner party, and they invited people like Hugh Johnson, Jancis Robinson, Charles Metcalfe, Michael Broadbent, like the great and the good of the wine world at the time. And I was the wine waiter. So I wouldn't call
Wow.
myself a sommelier. Definitely wasn't a sommelier, but I was charged with serving the wines. And the owner said, if there's anything left at the end of the bottles, then you can taste it. The aperitif that evening, so the first wine when they all arrived, was Krug 1979, served from a Jeroboam, which,
Wow.
you can't see how short I am, but I'm only 5 foot. So, this was a pretty big bottle for me to handle. And of course, I made sure there was a little bit left at the bottom of the bottle,
Of course.
and I tasted it, and I was 19 years old. I can still taste that wine today.
Yeah.
Um, a long time later. So that's my story. That's how I got into wine, and I've been in the wine business ever since. Now, my
On the
whole life.
production side, though.
No, no, I started out in well, working in this restaurant. I carried on there for a bit longer, and then I started working for Oddbins, which is a retail merchant. Was ubiquitous all in every high street in England. Very, very famous, renowned for sort of championing Australian wine back in the 80s. You know, when they first started exporting to the UK in any kind of scale. Um, so I did retail with Oddbins. I went to New Zealand, did a harvest in New Zealand, came back, worked for a Burgundy merchant in London. Um, and then I saw a job advertised as Hugh Johnson's editor for the Pocket Wine Book.
Oh, wow.
So I spent 4 years working on that and the World Atlas of Wine with Jancis Robinson. And so I got to know all those people I'd met when I was 19. I got to know them professionally as well. So it was fantastic. And then it wasn't until I was 29, 28, 29, I saw in this book that I was editing that Plumpton College, just outside Brighton, was started offering winemaking courses and winemaking degrees. And it was quite new. Obviously, it's not something that happens very much in the UK. And so I left London, I moved to Brighton, and I went back to university and studied winemaking. And yeah, that was it. That's history.
That's brilliant. I really appreciate the personal stories, because it makes everybody connect, and everybody comes from different routes, and wine brings so many of us together, and I really appreciate that. So could you give us an overview of the history and the terroir of sparkling wine in England?
Well, sparkling wine in England is quite young, really. There have been vines planted in England since the Romans first invaded. When the Romans came in 10 AD. Well, they first came in 10 BC, but they didn't bring any vines with them then. But when they properly invaded and properly colonized us in the first few centuries AD, they brought vines with them because, of course, you know, the Italians, the Romans, they needed wine because they couldn't survive without it. So we've had vines growing on and off in this country for millennia. But most of the vineyards got grubbed up during Henry VIII, thanks to Henry VIII, the Reformation. And, you know, they... when we sort of kicked out the Catholics and became a Protestant country, all of the monasteries which had vineyards for the communion, all those vineyards were grubbed up. But then it wasn't really again until the 1950s, that people started planting again. But they were planting German hybrids, weird and wacky varieties that you would never have heard of, like Reichensteiner and Siegerrieber and Madeleine Angevin. I mean, produced light, white, quite acidic, dry white wines. And it was the 1980s. In fact, it was an American couple, Sandy and Stuart Moss, who thought, why the hell are the English planting all these weird and wacky German varieties? Why aren't they emulating Champagne? Because surely the terroir and the climate is much more similar. So they started it, and then it's just snowballed from there. So they were the pioneers, and then Ridgeview in the 90s. Lots of these other older vineyards started converting over to Champagne varieties, the Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. And then my boss, Simon, who owns Hattingley, he'd heard an interview with Nightimber on the radio, and he had the idea of diversifying on his farm. He got an arable farm here, and he decided that, yes, he would plant some vineyards on his land. And that's when I got involved back in 2008. And I got to build the winery and you know, basically start the brand and the wine style from scratch, which is not something that many winemakers get the chance to do, particularly in old world Europe.
Yeah, really. And your website treats that very funny, how you got him to buy all the best stuff. And being the winemaker, you rent a town. And I want to hear about that. But before, while we're talking kind of macro, so I talked to another Simon Roberts at Ridgeview last week, and learned from him that the soil is still the Paris Basin. The chalk cliffs that you often see is the same soil, and you're a little bit north, but you have a longer growing season. Could you flesh out the similarities and differences, just terroir and geography, from Champagne, and why these grapes are working in England so well?
So I don't know whether you know the old Second World War song, "The White Cliffs of Dover," the
Hmm.
sort of iconic image of the coast, the south coast of
Exactly.
England, which is the chalk that you can just see it. It shines brilliant white. We've got that here, about about 30 centimeters below my feet is solid chalk.
Oh, okay.
So there's a flinty loam topsoil,
Hmm.
and then and then this. I tell you what, I could show you. They're called Hampshire diamonds. So where Simon Roberts is, where you would have seen him last week, he's in Sussex. We're a bit further northwest. We're on the northwestern tip of the South Downs National Park, which is where
Okay.
all the chalk is. And it's the same seam of chalk runs from where I'm standing here. This is the far northwestern tip, runs all the way through Sussex, Hampshire, Sussex, Kent, comes up at Dover as the White Cliffs, goes under the English Channel, and comes back up in France as the Côte de Blanc. So it's
It's
the same
so
soil.
wild to me that there's that snowdrift of earth down underneath there. It's fascinating to me.
So
And
I'm
the
going to,
grapes still work. They work equally well there.
so yes, well, they're different. I mean, I would say, and talking to people in Champagne, we probably have the climate that Champagne had about 30 years ago. So
Okay.
Champagne started harvesting yesterday, today. We won't start on this site here for at least another 4 or 5 weeks.
Oh wow.
So that's the difference.
Okay.
But the soil is very similar. I'm going to flip you to the opposite mode so I can show you some of the soil. And
Awesome.
we're looking at Chardonnay here. So just hope this works.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know whether you can see. These are what we call Hampshire diamonds, the flints.
Okay.
So they're really they're a nightmare for the machinery in the vineyard
I
because
bet.
they just chew things up. I'll show you. I've got an enormous one over here. It's the size of my head. So I don't know whether you can see that one.
Yeah.
I mean,
Wow.
if I put my foot next to it, you can sort of see the size.
Uh-huh. Wow.
Okay, I've got small feet, but yeah.
That'll mess up a
So
plow.
yeah, it does mess up the plows. So yeah, that's the soil is almost identical. Um, we have a different trellising system. You can see it's unlike Champagne, which is they're a meter apart and a meter rows and very, very low. Ours are relatively high, so the grapes are at waist height as far as I'm concerned. But you can
Right.
see we are a long way off ripening.
Yeah.
A
Wow.
long way off ripening.
Wow.
Um,
Since you're right there, Simon also just mentioned, just to build on what I have learned, that your trellises are much higher, and I think you're having your grapes further from the ground to prevent frost damage. Is that correct?
yeah, well, also, I mean, you think about Champagne and why they have their grapes down that low and why they're so narrow. It's because it's the width of a horse.
Right.
So, and now they have to have these special tractors designed which straddle the vines. So we go, if I try and go back into selfie mode, you can see I'm 5 foot.
Okay. Oh yeah.
So they're at least 6 foot.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's
And you
perfect
said,
height for me.
and the yeah, right. The grapes are basically, you leave the grapes to grow at your hip height or a little bit higher than your hips.
Yeah, they're hip height,
Okay.
around hip to waist height for me.
Okay.
Yeah. So, which is a lot easier than it is if you're in Champagne and having to
Yeah.
literally be on your knees to pick. So,
Yeah. Really.
but yeah, so we have, and it makes it easier to mechanize as well. We can use like proper tractors, like orchard tractors, rather than those straddling tractors, which are really dangerous to drive on as well,
Oh, right.
especially when you're on a slope,
Yeah.
like some of these. So yeah, we've got the same varieties. I'm going to just wander up to the next
Sure.
patch, which is Pinot Meunier. So you can hopefully there'll be some that are starting to turn. Oh yes, starting to turn. I'm going to turn you back onto the other
Awesome.
direction.
Love it.
So I don't know whether you can see, but I'm standing. That's Chardonnay.
Okay.
I'm going to come back a bit. That's Chardonnay.
Uh-huh.
And then this one is Pinot Meunier.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And you can always tell Meunier by the color of the leaves on the tips.
Okay.
So there we are. And they have this sort of fluff on them.
Okay.
So I'm just trying. I don't know if you can see that fluff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
That's
the
awesome.
Meunier. Meunier means miller. So like there's like they look like they've had a dusting of flour on them.
Right, right.
And
That's
here we
awesome.
are. Sorry, there we are. Look,
Oh, yeah, okay.
the raison has
Nice.
happened.
I
Veraison has
love
happened.
I love when people start posting pictures of Veraison. It's the best
Yeah.
time of year.
So I've
So
got lots of friends in California who obviously within the sparkling vineyards, they probably picked about a month ago.
yeah, yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
just talked to somebody in Tuscany, and they've already picked the grapes for their Vinsanto, which they want higher acid, so they're picking earlier. So it's kind of crazy that Tuscany's already harvesting. Um,
Yeah.
so I see the rolling hills in the background, and you mentioned slopes.
Yep.
Is it beneficial to have those rolling hills, even though you have the drainage of the chalk beneath you?
Yes, because of the aspect of the sun. So you want to maximize the exposure to the sun. So ours are running, I'm facing north and the row behind me is directly south.
Okay.
And so you get the sun rises in the east over there. Um, and so it hits that side of the row in the morning, and then it maximizes it during the day, and in the evening you get the sun in the afternoon sun on the western side of the
Okay.
canopy. So you maximize your exposure to the sun as well by doing
And
that.
then, do you start stripping leaves to increase airflow and sunlight soon?
So we have done some leaf stripping already.
Yeah.
So let me push you back this way. So you can see that we did a mechanical leaf strip.
Oh, okay.
And so that where before the berries got anywhere in danger of being damaged by that. And then some patches we've gone through and done a hand leaf strip, but you can see there's a few leaves on the ground
Oh, yeah.
here where
Okay.
but yes, we do. Canopy management is absolutely vital because the disease pressure is so high, and particularly this year. But we've got, as you can see, we've got a lovely, clean, healthy canopy. We just need that canopy to last until the end of October to
Wow.
finish ripening. Yeah,
It's like a
so
white knuckle ride to the end.
it is
Um,
very much so. Yes.
what did just be, I want to talk about the farm shortly, but just one other question about you guys in the spring. I assume that's when your danger of frost is. Do you guys use the candles like they do in Chablis, or do you spray water? How do you prevent frost if it's a danger, and when is that?
So, so a lot of our neighbouring vineyards do use candles and light them. So we had a site where we had to do that, but we no longer own that site or no longer run that site. On these sites here, we're actually quite high. We're for
Oh,
England, we're about 150 meters above sea level,
okay.
which is a little bit on the high side. But what that does give us is a huge advantage at frost in the spring frosts is that we get such good airflow and we're good frost, good cold air drainage. So we tend not to be hit by frost so badly here, although we have been. But we do have they're called frost guards. They're big, like big hair dryers, basically, and
Oh,
enormous
okay.
hair dryers. Yeah, they're like a fan heater, a blow heater.
Okay.
Um, and we set those off, but we only had to light them once this year, whereas our neighbours, who are much lower down in terms of altitude, were out for about 2 weeks every night lighting
Wow.
candles, which is incredibly tedious. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And is the frost from it's just extra cold at certain times, or is it that it's a little warmer, you have bud break earlier than we used to? Which case is that?
It's a bit of both. So we're
Oh, it is.
bursting a little bit earlier than we ever used to, and we're getting much later frosts as well. So it's a combination of both, and
Okay.
no 2 years are the same.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about the Hattingley Valley Winery? And you said it was a farm, and I thought I'm really into like diversification and biodiversity on the land, and so that really struck me. Can you tell me the story there?
So Simon Robinson, the owner, he was a senior partner at the corporate law firm Slaughter and May, which is one of the big city law firms in London. That's what paid for all of this. Someone's got to pay for it.
Exactly.
But he, over the last few decades, he'd been buying this. His family grew up around here, so he
Oh,
had his wife and kids were sort of based down here while he was up in London, and he bought this farm. I'm not sure how many acres, about 600 acres, I think, in total, and it's mainly arable. And these vineyards were once wheat fields.
okay.
We've got two sites here. We're just in one of them at the moment. And then his eldest son also runs livestock on the rest of the farm as well. So we feed the cows, get fed all the grape pomace at
Well,
harvest
they
time.
do. Awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but then you I never. This is again my ignorance about the world. You specifically mentioned on your website so many microclimates that help you decide where you're going to source your grapes from. Can you speak about that a little bit for me?
So yeah, this vineyard here, we've got about 20 acres here in this site and the one next door, which is just a few hundred yards down the valley. Um, Only about 20 acres, which is less than 10% of our total production. So I quickly realized when I came on board that these vineyard sites here were going to be they're high quality, but very low yielding
Oh,
because of their altitude.
okay.
So it's always a struggle to get a good yield here, but it's fine because we get very high quality fruit, make some of our top wines come from these sites, but it would not be commercial to do that,
Hmm.
to rely on these sites. So right from the word go, I started to source grapes from other producers. So I got long-term partnerships with growers all over the southeast of England, and I buy grapes on long-term contracts from all those guys. So at this time of year, if I'm not in this vineyard, I'm driving around the south, all around London, basically, all the counties around London, um, checking on the progress because everything ripens earlier in Kent in the east, ripens a bit later here. We might get frost here, they won't get frost there, that kind of thing. So it depends very much on the year. But yes, to ameliorate the risk and the variability of the yields, which can be vast. I source grapes from across the country.
And what accounts, again, this sounds like kind of a stupid question, but it's, again, me being open with my ignorance. What accounts for the microclimate? Is it closeness to the sea, being in a valley, altitude, grapes grown? What makes up those different microclimates?
I'd say, yeah, site selection is the key thing in England. To get that wrong, and then you will struggle. So altitude is the most important. So ideally, you want to be below 100 meters, which is what, 300 feet or so.
Hmm.
You need to be sheltered, so you don't want to have too much exposure to the wind, but you don't want it to be so sheltered that you don't get any breeze to clear the disease risk through,
Hmm.
and dry out the canopy. You want to be on a slope that's a gentle slope, not too steep, because then you can't get the tractors on. Um, and it needs to have good access, obviously, for getting the grapes in and out. And so, yeah, shelter, exposure, soil. So there are some heavy clay soils around. You don't want to be planting on the heavy clay because it just doesn't drain. And then you get waterlogged vines. So there are two types of soil which really seem to be where the best vineyards are planted: the chalk, which is what we're on here, with a flinty loam topsoil, and then there's also sand, green sand, and sandy soils based over in the. So you're not, rather than being when you're up on the downs, up on the South Downs, it's chalky, and when you're down in the hills below, in the valleys below, it's green sand and sandy soils.
Okay.
But avoid the clay.
Okay. Well, and you're doing it very quickly. You're not having centuries like the monks in Burgundy to figure it all out.
No, exactly. Yeah, been a very
Um,
steep learning curve. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So could you tell me about the different wines that you make at Hattingley?
Oh gosh, we now make about 12 different wines. It's insane. I mean, we're just going to make the very best sparkling wines, traditional method from the classic varieties, and that's what we're going to do because that's what England's good at.
Uh-huh.
But of course, then there's always exceptions that prove the rule. So our core wines are a classic reserve, which is a non-vintage traditional blend of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. It's aged about 3 or 4 years on lees, and that's our sort of entry level, if you like, sparkling.
And
Five.
is that a wine that you want to be consistent year in, year out?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I deliberately, that's a non-vintage. We keep a lot of reserve wine back to blend that as
Okay.
we're going. Um, and then we have our rosé sparkling, which is, we can't make enough of that, to be honest. It flies out the door. And that's just Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. And we've won so many awards for that wine. It's just insane over the years. We just can't produce enough.
Good for
And
you.
then we do a Blanc de Blanc, 100% Chardonnay, 5-6 years on lees before releasing. So we're currently on the 2014 vintage, 5 years on lees and a year on cork.
Oh, okay.
And that's just the very, very best parcels of Chardonnay. So those vintage wines we don't always make every year, only if we get the right mix in the winery. And that's my job, is to make sure with all these different people I'm working with, that I keep the mix right in terms of grape varieties and sources of where they're coming from as well. Then we do a King's Cuvée, which up until, well, consistently, always, it's our prestige cuvee. It's 100% barrel fermented. And that's the key to our style. Every single one of our wines has had some kind of barrel element to it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Whether it's 10% or 100%. But those wines always come, the King's Cuvée, our prestige cuvee, always comes from these sites here, our home vineyards, which is a nice sort of thing. And it was Supreme Champion at the Wines of Great Britain National Awards last year.
Wow.
So
Congratulations.
it's one of those wines, we only use old barrels, we don't use new oak, because it's too powerful for the wines. So we're always using gentle, old, fairly neutral oak. And that's the consistent thing about that wine. But it also means that it surprises some people, because it doesn't taste like they expect an English sparkling wine to taste.
Well, and barrel fermenting is a whole other art, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I spent my first 2 years out of when I graduated in California, Napa Valley.
Okay.
Making everything but sparkling. But we used there were thousands of barrels, and I loved working with the barrels. So when we started here, Simon, he had no idea that using barrels was not really that normal in sparkling wine. So I just told him it was, and that I needed barrels, so we got some, and we've been using them ever since, and it's now part of our style. So
I love it. But then you make still wine now, which is even more unusual.
Yeah, we now are making a couple of still wines. 2019 was the first time we ever did it. A rosé. We had a new vineyard that had just come on stream in Kent. So we planted, well, it's about 40 acres now that he planted for us. He's a grower that just works with us in Kent. And he planted some Pinot Noir Précoce, which is an early ripening clone or mutation of Pinot Noir, to be more factual. And that came in early 2019, and it was so delicious. It was so delicious. When it was fermenting, it just tasted like a Provence rosé. So we decided we had to just bottle it. And so that was the first time we'd ever done a still wine. And then last year, 2020, it was so hot here. It was like the perfect growing season. And so we pinpointed some parcels of Chardonnay, which we did green harvest, leaf stripping on, and we made a relatively small volume of still Chardonnay and the rosé again as well. And we're just about to bottle our very first red Pinot Noir in very, very small quantities from 2020. That's been in barrel since last harvest. So we'll see.
Amazing. My friend Carrie is asking, what are people's expectations on how a UK sparkling should taste? Say Americans who are used to champagne and California sparkling. What do you find people know, and what do they expect from you and your wine?
So I would say from English sparkling wines generally, you're looking for, and what the real marker is, a really fine, pure acidity, very linear, very elegant, but all backed up with some really delicious fruit as well. Because we have this super long growing season. They're picking in Champagne already. We've only just hit Veraison. We've got another 4 or 5 weeks to go. So we've got all of that extra time for the grapes to produce so much flavour. So it's usually apple, elderflower, stone fruits, and pears. Occasionally you get a bit of tropical character, some of the Chardonnays, and then in the Pinot Noir Meunier dominant grape wines, you get raspberries, strawberries, these traditional classic English fruits, which, I always describe our rosé as like eating strawberries and cream, or an Eton mess. I don't know if you know that, like a meringue crushed with cream and strawberries and raspberries. That's what we're looking for when we're making that wine. So bright English, sort of classic English fruits, and apples, but they're all marked through with this really fine acidity.
Nice. I like to hear that. And then we're almost out of time. I told you I wouldn't take more than a half an hour. And thank you, by the way, for being so flexible with my bad email with the dates and everything. So thanks for that.
I'm so glad that you got it wrong, because I actually would have got it wrong as well. So yeah.
We both rolled with it, and I really appreciate it. Just before we go, what are you looking at for the 2021 vintage? How's this harvest going to be when you get there?
It's going to be small, I think, relatively small. It's going to be very late. It's going to be a long one. It's going to be hard. But some of those vintages, I call them sleeper vintages. You think, oh, they're not much fun while you're doing them because they're just a hard slog, and it's cold and it's wet and it drags on and on and on. But some of those sleeper vintages are actually, like, 5 or 6 years down the line will be fantastic.
Yeah.
For the sparklings. I'm not sure what we'll be able to do in terms of still wine this year. I'm not making any promises anyway to anybody.
Okay.
We got to wait and see. But the sparklings will be, hopefully, judging by how things have gone in the past, will be exceptional given time.
Okay. Well, I gotta say, we know you're a great winemaker, but just you're selling the wines. I'm like, my mouth's still watering thinking about berries and cream, and it sounds amazing. So I will let you go. Thank you so much for your time. Do you have anything else that we should know that I didn't ask to the American public about English sparkling? I don't want to put you on the spot, but if there's anything I missed that you want to say, otherwise we can just leave it there, and thank you very much.
Well, I don't know. If you're ever traveling on British Airways, then make sure you ask for a glass of Hattingley.
That's right.
It's served in first class and the business lounges. And yeah, I mean, we are available quite widely. I mean, I couldn't tell you which shops or anything, but we are available particularly on the east coast of the States. So yeah, just make sure you ask for a glass of English rather than champagne. We have the climate that champagne had 30 years ago, so they can't make wines like we do anymore.
Well, it's exciting to see how you guys are growing and how open people are to trying it, and how pleasantly surprised people are when they do try it. So it's a thrill watching everything go along. So thank you so much, Emma. I really appreciate your time. You're a great educator, and you've got a beautiful backdrop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.